Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to the 2-hour webinar. I should possibly make it a 2.5-hour webinar. Okay, so what I wanted to go through with you was how to do the risk assessment and management plan. You all did very well with the comprehensive assessment, and I think you all understood clearly that that was the place to collect information. Okay, so now we're going to do the risk assessment and the management plan. So this is the document. So for John, for example, this is disruption to service. So this one really addresses and helps you know at the beginning of it, this person, what is their vulnerability and how do I make sure I know upfront before they even start receiving services that if there was an emergency or a disaster or a COVID outbreak where the staff are unavailable, you've only got 50% of your workforce, how will I know whether this person is one of the high need or a person who's going to be okay and can be without a service for a few days, given that you might have to work with a really reduced workforce. So you would ask yourself, to what degree does this client rely on services from us to meet their daily needs? For John, I got the impression for John that he can make or he can feed himself. He can't shower though, he said. He said he can't get in and out of the bath on his own, and he does have a falls risk. So I would have to say, based on that, we would say daily service, and that's probably why he's going into a SIL service as well. So we click that. So we've got traffic light here is what you use. Green, like the green light, means go. It's not so, it's low, medium, amber, and red is high. It's high urgency, high priority, danger. That's what red means. So we use traffic lights. To what extent would the health and safety of this participant be affected if those services they had are disrupted? Really, I think there's going to be mental and physical harm, and it would commence within 24 hours. Okay, so we tick that. So we know that for John, we've got 2 highs. So we know a disruption to service of our own service is going to impact on him, and that puts him in the top of the list for who do we prioritize if we don't have enough staff to go around. Okay, so you know that from the onset. So the risk areas, relationships and sexuality. We don't know that he has any of these at this point. We do know, though, remembering that the John that we had was a little bit too articulate for the diagnoses that we are working with. So that would look a little bit different, and there would be every reason to believe there would be a nominee or a family member or a representative in that room with somebody who has a moderate intellectual disability and moderate autism, more than likely. Okay, so sometimes with intellectual disability, you might find that people are prone to flirting or unsafe sex. So we don't know. But this is where you would talk about some of these. Mum was a little bit annoying. That was me. Who knows? We don't know that there's domestic violence, but I think there's some, I think she's a bit of a bully. Yeah. So I would have construed that she was a bit of a bully. So, but we would not know that for sure, but we would certainly mark something, and you can certainly write in here, you know, Mum was slightly overbearing, was how I was trying to be. So we would do that. So we've ticked that one. All right, unsafe lifestyle choices. He says he doesn't do drugs and he doesn't do alcohol. A lot of people would say that. A health practitioner or a nominee might say differently, but we can only go what we know. So he doesn't smoke anymore. He doesn't appear to have any criminal behaviour. The drug misuse, I would just have a question mark around that, because he says he does partake of the Panadine Fort when he has some pain. And I think he was trying to, I think John Brandon was trying to kind of plant that seed for us. So there could be, it's worth exploring. Yeah. We don't know if he's hoarding yet. We'll know that later. It might have come to us from a transition plan from wherever he's coming. We just may not know a lot of these things yet. Okay. He said he doesn't smoke anymore, so we know none of these apply. We don't think he's a sharps and knives issue. I mean, water hazard bathing, he did say himself that he can fall over. So we know that there could be a risk of falls here. Yeah. So risk area, environmental, traffic, roads, travel, private, travel, public. He's getting around and his mobility was okay. And usually your nominee will tell you in that comprehensive part of your assessment if people aren't good at crossing the road. And so some of this we just won't know for a little while. But certainly we didn't pick up any risk areas so far, but you might down the track. He says he doesn't have a behaviour support plan. There's a good chance he doesn't. Not every person with moderate autism and moderate intellectual disability is going to have a behaviour concern. But let's remember that given his morbid obesity and his lifestyle problems, and I already said he's got some problems with his health, etc. There could be a behaviour concern, which is overeating. So we would explore that as well, very interestingly. And sometimes it will take a little while to come out. I thought it was very funny when Sarah said, obviously you like your food. I thought that was very funny. And health and well-being, abuse and neglect. Yeah, you know, coming back from that domestic violence, we can't say there's domestic violence, obviously, but there could be, you know, I would have my eyes open and my awareness around mum, just until you get to know whether they're detrimental or not detrimental and manageable. We know we got a swallowing difficulty, didn't we? We just don't know what it is yet. And so that's a good one. And yes, he has occasionally had a bit of a choke, and it was great the way somebody added that in there, that somebody has trouble and they may choke. They asked that question, and I thought that was great. So at this point, we don't know about the textured diet, etc., because we haven't had an assessment. It's really just a self-report, and that's a self-report from John, which is good. And our mum didn't elaborate on that, so we would be taking that to the next level, but we certainly can only say there's a swallowing difficulty now, there can be food choking, and we don't know what that mealtime management plan is going to look like, so we can't tick it yet. But sometimes what you can do is go, yeah, you know what, we're going to know soon because we're going to get a speech therapist in, and we'll know later. So sometimes I highlight things so that I can come back to them, and it's really clear that, you know, I have to come back to it because it's highlighted. Risk area, sorry. We know that we don't know if he's got any, you know, if some of those lifestyle diseases are there, but there was no diagnosis of diabetes at the time. He doesn't seem to get too many colds. He doesn't have seizures. He's had one, but he doesn't get it anymore. There's a few things here we don't know. And mum didn't answer any questions. Skin conditions. Well, I think the only thing that we could say at the moment is he says he's got a rash, and we don't know whether that's a wound or not. We don't know whether he's got a pressure sore, but that's the first thing that I'd be thinking of with someone in a wheelchair who says they've got a rash and it hurts, and that sitting down hurts. There's a very good chance that he could have some pressure, and that we would have a nurse assess that. Okay. We didn't hear anything about his mental illness, dementia. We did know going in he was obese. Yeah. We're not sure about dental health yet, but that will come out in the wash when we start to have the comprehensive healthcare plans and he goes to the dentist for the first time, etc. Because we don't know the reason for the dysphagia. We don't know why he's having swallowing difficulties. It could be because he doesn't have enough teeth, or it could be something to do with people with an intellectual disability can often have swallowing difficulties. I'm not sure for the reason. There is some research around it, but I don't know it off the top of my head. So then we come down and we ask questions around the medications that are prescribed. And we're talking about, don't forget, we need to have a comprehensive health assessment plan, the CHAP. It's a reminder, it's there to remind. We're also asking, is this person on any psychotropic drugs that are prescribed for them? And there's no mental illness, as we were talking about. When that occurs, it's because someone is prescribing it as a restrictive practice, as a behavior modification strategy. And I'm not saying that those shouldn't occur, but what we need to have when you've got someone on a psychotropic drug who doesn't have a mental illness diagnosed, you can explore and find out if that's for a restrictive practice or behavior modification. If it's a restrictive practice, it must be written in a plan. If not, you need to engage someone. If someone wants to use that option to modify somebody's behavior, there must be a behavior support plan in place. If they're in a service and you're servicing them. And if it's a covert behavior modification strategy, it needs to be taken out of the shadows. No more covert behavior modification. A GP must be able to say to you, the prescriber must be able to say to you, this drug is prescribed for this purpose. It's not fair for a GP to prescribe Valium or Seroquel for somebody's behavior, but not to document that in a clarification of purpose form. That's not fair. It's too much to ask of support workers and service providers to make those decisions. That person's behaviour warrants giving them Seroquel. That person's behaviour warrants giving them Valium. Now, if they are of sound mind and want to take it themselves, that's a different matter altogether. But if it's being used to modify somebody's behaviour, that takes it into a realm of, we need clarification of purpose. Because if something goes wrong with that person and they collapse and have a respiratory failure, or they have medications that are interacting with each other, and they either die or are very ill and an ambulance is called, someone's going to be looking for answers. And if you've been the one who's decided that their behaviour warranted giving this medication, but there is nothing in writing from a practitioner prescribing it to say, this is when we would use this medication, you can see that you're opening yourself up to a whole lot of things which are just not okay to be opened up to as a provider or a support worker or a team leader or a manager. So you have to be very careful about that. So make sure that you know what the purpose is. It's called clarification of purpose, and we get it from the prescriber of the medication. So personal care, we knew that he had some issues with showering and bathing. He needed supervision. We don't know about his dental hygiene yet. At this point, we don't know about shaving and grooming because we had limited input. I mean, as mum, I could have sat there and given you a whole lot of information, but I did want to see where John went with it as well. These are sorts of things that we are going to learn as we go along. We can't know everything unless we've been given everything in the beginning to know that with. So we do know, though, he said he does have a problem with falling, okay? Infectious diseases. He says he's not getting a lot of upper respiratory tract infections. With his transfers and mobility, yes, there are some mobility issues, but it's probably just going to be an assisted, assisting him into and out of his wheelchair. Perhaps the same with the mobility and getting into a vehicle, moving in and out of bed, it would need an assessment. And that's why we have these assessments in home. If he's going to have personal care, we would have a bit of an assessment to see what functions, what activities of daily living does he need assistance with. So we may not know all of these things yet, yeah? But we do know he's going to need personal care, some assistance with transfers and vehicle access. Unsafe actions, we don't know about those yet. Sometimes you will know because someone will tell you what they are, but at this point we don't know. So there you go. So, you know, we've picked all this. I'm going to use dysphagia because it's the one that we're focusing on. It's one of the newest problems that have been added to the practice standard. So identified risk, swallowing and choking. Okay, it's triggered by, well, we know what it's triggered by, eating food. At this point, that's all we know. Risk rating, the likelihood and consequence. Okay, so what are we referring to when it says, what's my risk rating? So we're going to go, oh, here's a table. So we're looking for likelihood and the consequence of when John swallows and he has a choking episode from eating food. What is the likelihood of it happening and the consequence should it happen? Well, the consequence should it happen is fairly extreme. And although we didn't get, you know, an exact timing, he told us that he often chokes when he's eating food and he doesn't know why. So consequence will be extreme, and the likelihood of it occurring is either going to be likely or almost certain. And I'd say almost certain. So he's got an extreme rating. We get that from the two axes. Okay, so we go axis X. What is the consequence should this occur? It is extreme. What is the likelihood of it occurring? Almost certain. Here we are at extreme. We have an extreme risk. That's our rating. That's how we do a risk assessment on anything, whether it's business, individuals, anything at all. Okay, so we had extreme. So we're going to tick extreme. We know it's red, it's extreme, it's big time. What are the goals that this is going to impact on? Well, his independence. He's going to need support. His life in general, and quality of life. Risk strategy. Well, number one, for John, he's going to we're going to organize a speech therapist to do an assessment urgently, and possible mealtime plan in place ASAP, and follow-up reviews. Now, we know if we get a mealtime plan in place, we know that incorporates having supervision from staff. So we could sort of say that, but we don't need to because the mealtime management plan talks about the supervision. But for now, we're going to watch carefully. So instead of saying follow-up reviews, in fact, what I might say is in the interim, do a swallowing checklist, which are easy to obtain, just so we have some idea, and give close supervision at mealtime until we get it all in place. Taking notes as appropriate. So we've got something to report to the speech therapist. Appropriate. Okay, frequency of review. Well, because this is new, I'd be having a look at this weekly until I got the mealtime plan in place. Is a separate action plan required? If yes, state the location of this plan. Probably, although we could very much just use a copy and paste of what we have here. So I'm going to say no in this case. No, and we'll use that. So who did this? Gina Ingerol. You may be, I'll be the approver. But if it's if you need approval, if the hierarchy and the structure in your business requires you to get it approved, then your manager must approve it. But many owner operators are able to approve them themselves. So that is how we do collect information that is going to help us identify and know that person, but identify where we're going to have to risk assess later on, then come over to a very comprehensive risk identification form, which just requires ticking, really, because we want to know what we've got. What I often do also when I come back over this is wherever I've ticked, I make it red. That's just me. You don't have to do that. But I like to do that because then I'm very visual, and I very much like traffic lights, red, amber, and green. They really help me. And what happens is once you use them for a long time, you actually don't have to read so much. You get this visual of it's either a lot of green or it's a lot of red or it's a lot of amber, and you know exactly what it means. And it just helps you keep your wits about you. So I like to go over things and make them red. Okie dokie, but you don't have to. So here we go. Now at a moment's glance, I get to see a picture. If there's lots and lots of red, well, I know there's lots and lots of risk. So it helps me to just go straight to the entry that I need to look at. So there we go. So this is your risk calculator. Once you've been doing this for a while, you're going to be able to just about calculate that in your head because you're going to know this so well. But for now, practice using this. What is the consequence if it occurs? And what is the likelihood of it occurring? Okay, well done, everyone. So have a go at this. Now, if you can give me just one risk assessment that has been worked into this table and send it back to me, I will assess it and I will give you a mark. And I'll give you a certificate to say that you have actually completed a risk assessment. Now, if it needs any amendments, I will send them back to you so that you know where you've done correctly and where there could be some changes to make it work a little better. So please do send it back to me, and yeah, I will be able to provide you a certificate of completion. Thank you so much.